So one of my first experiences ending up in foster care had to do with the fact that when I was probably around 3 to 4 years old, I wasn't growing the way they expected me to in the school systems and stuff. I was put in preschool early, both because my birth mother probably needed a place to put me during the day, and probably because I was a little bit, ahead in some certain things. So I probably needed that intellectual support, right? So I was in school early, and as a result of that, people noticed pretty early on that I was sort of failing to thrive in terms of my development. They noticed that one day I went in and I had ringworm on my inner thighs, and they basically, and when I'm saying they, I mean the teachers and administrators, basically fast-tracked an investigation into my family. My birth mother was incredibly offended and just, irate with that entire process. She refused to participate in it. She was living with a child abuser who would later become I call him a baby rapist, because I just want to be super clear about what a terrible human being that was. But anyhow, as a result of that, I end up in the Massachusetts foster care system.
Welcome back to Flip That Shit. And my guest today is Dee Ciruolo. And so Dee's story is really profound and impactful. It's a story about being in the foster care system in Massachusetts and having, a broken family system, essentially. Mm-hmm. And so if you grew up in a broken family system or a broken family constellation, and you found yourself not with your family of origin and either in foster care or just, popping around within family members, this could be a really, really good story for you, because so often what I realize in the work that I do is that as profound as these experiences are, a lot of people that I work with do not understand that the reason why they're stuck in adulthood is because of these experiences. I know you're going to do such a great job here because we're going to make it super duper comfortable. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
I'm wondering if you can share how you ended up in foster care to begin with.
Sure. So one of my first experiences ending up in foster care had to do with the fact that when I was probably around 3 to 4 years old, I wasn't growing the way they expected me to in the school systems and stuff. I was put in preschool early, both because my birth mother probably needed a place to put me during the day, and probably because I was a little bit, ahead in some certain things. So I probably needed that intellectual support, right? So I was in school early, and as a result of that, people noticed pretty early on that I was sort of failing to thrive in terms of my development. They noticed that one day I went in and I had ringworm on my inner thighs, and they basically, and when I'm saying they, I mean the teachers and administrators, basically fast-tracked an investigation into my family. My birth mother was incredibly offended and just, irate with that entire process. She refused to participate in it. She was living with a child abuser who would later become I call him a baby rapist, because I just want to be super clear about what a terrible human being that was. But anyhow, as a result of that, I end up in the Massachusetts foster care system. My middle brother and I, who is my half brother, kind of bounced back and forth between that experience. So that's how we end up in foster care originally. Firstly, because I was failure to thrive, and then secondly, when I was sexually abused by my mother's boyfriend. So when that happened, they sort of closed all doors to, giving her support and stuff, and instead just being like, okay, you make bad choices and you are a safety risk for your children. We're going to remove them and put them in foster care. So,
and how did they figure out the second incident?
So the second incident, basically at the point where I was very precocious as a child, as you might imagine. So I was basically just chattering because of the ADHD with like my teachers and stuff. And I did not realize these were things that we kept hidden or would be in any way shameful experiences. I would just, be talking to my teacher and be casually like, oh, okay, so this happened to me. I was very upset about it, hurt, all of these things. And she would, of course, be like, what? Immediately we are dealing with this. So basically, I this happened, I think the first person who found out that I had been sexually abused was actually my mean daycare lady, but she basically pulled in the rest of my effective care team, and fast tracked me out of there. So that was how. And
I'm trying to go back to the book. Is this a time, because I thought it was so brilliant, this survival strategy, there was a time where you stopped bathing.
Yes. Okay. So that's incredibly common when it comes to sexual abuse survivors. What you end up seeing in children is that they will stop taking care of their personal hygiene. They will want to stop. And it's not necessarily always that they are, they're doing it consciously. I was doing it consciously. I did not want to be in the bathroom where my mother's boyfriend could find me alone. I did not want to be, interesting to him. I wanted to be gross and smelly, but that was because I was conscious of why I was doing this. It's also an unconscious reaction in children when they are being abused.
100%. And I thought, look, I really want people to read this book, because I think it's so important that we understand everybody's individual lived experiences. Of
course.
But what I found so fascinating about that chapter in the book was, first of all, fucking brilliant, right? Like, right, it's subconscious for some people, but you were young. How old were you?
I was probably 4 or 5 max.
Yeah, I was going to say 5 years old. And you're making this conscious decision. It's a brilliant decision. I'm not safe in the bathroom. This is where sometimes he comes for me. I'm just going to stop bathing. And by the way, if I'm disgusting, he's not going to want you. And what was so atrocious to me was him going to your mother and saying, I want you to get her douche.
Yes.
And your mother was going to do it.
Yeah. And that's why I say, and my human mother went ahead and did so. And the reason I say it like that is because now that I'm a mother, I'm just like, the hell you would, right? Like, absolutely not. But she doesn't remember it that way. Even to this day, she remembers that she was just a perfect mother. And of course, she was just having a hard time because she was 19, not that she was part of the abuse. Obviously.
She was an enabler.
Right. Of course. She was
so, not to excuse anybody's behavior, because there's absolutely zero excuse for it. But so often when I'm working with clients and we're at this kind of level of trauma that we're working through, we often talk about epigenetics. And again, not to excuse the behavior of someone, but I might ask a client, why do you think your mom did that?
Yeah. No.
Because I think it's really important for people who are on the receiving end tend to, especially when they're at this very young age or even a pre-verbal age, will automatically make the assumption based on the egoist view of a child under the age of 10. There must be something wrong with me because she's an adult. She's in the role of parent. And therefore, the logical thought of a 5-year-old, 8-year-old, 9-year-old is they must know better. So if they know better, I must be doing something wrong, or I must be broken. Or what I've heard a lot is I'm not worthy of anything else. This is my destiny.
Yeah, of course. And to answer your semi-asked question there, I would say that yes, my birth mother was sexually abused, and she has admitted that to me. And I know that the reason that she was okay with this, allowed this, and in some cases participated in my abuse was that she was used to, from her own experience, maybe potentially her own mother excusing and sort of telling her that it didn't matter, and all of her behaviors would have been passed down to my mother. And I recognize that. And when I was younger, before I had kids, and I say this in the book as well, I'm trying not to spoil it for everybody, but like, I say this before I had kids, that I was so much more forgiving of who she was as a mother when I was like 19, 20 years old. I was like, okay, maybe she was too young to have kids. Maybe she was dealing with some stuff, maybe all of this. But then when I had my children, and especially my daughter, who was a tiny version of me, if she is anything, like, she rolls her eyes and it takes her the full 30 seconds. Like, I got exactly what I deserve, right? So when I met this little on fire individual who was just in love with alive with curiosity and in love with being alive. I was stunned for that's what pushed me to write the book. I met this little girl and I thought, how dare you? It completely changed everything that everybody had told me my whole life. Abusers had told me my whole life, you're too loud, you're too much, you're too this, you're too everything, you're too much.
Therefore, you're deserving of it.
Therefore, you are deserving of the way that I treat you. And then I met my daughter and I was like, I am going to eat all of you. And the healthiest thing I could do was write a book. So that was the healthiest. Because
it's interesting because I agree with you on a lot of levels. I do educate a lot on intergenerational trauma, but like yourself, I am absolutely a cycle breaker. Exactly. And cycle breaking has been incredibly painful, especially because there's usually not a mass exodus of the cycle breaker in the family. You're usually the one and only. And so it's a very lonely, painful place to be. Mm-hmm. There's a part that looks back and goes, okay, well, I did it, so how come you couldn't?
It's both, right? So it's a dual consciousness thing, right? I have to see myself as both different enough to have been able to do it when everyone else couldn't. And also, the other side of that as well at the same time. So it has to be both for me. I mean, sometimes.
What's the other side of it for you?
So I would say that when I was strong enough to leave, when other people weren't strong enough to leave, I have to be like, okay, well, maybe I have something special in me. Maybe I have something special that I had to do. And sort of, I guess the other side is that I'm so, not even just that I'm so different, that they are so much the same. You know what I mean? That you don't change. Okay, you know what? The easier way to say this, you don't change unless something hurts you enough to move you into it, right? Like human beings don't like change. We like the same over and over again, right? Change is painful. Change is explosive at times. And if you have to leave an abusive situation, that all is just as scary as staying in the abusive situation, right? So for me, the reason I left that situation was because she made me. So my foster mother, one of the very last situations that we had together, I had gone on a trip. I came back from the trip and I basically found her at home beating her youngest daughter. And I was like, I wasn't afraid anymore. You know what I mean? Like I had grown into this place where I was like, okay, when it was me, it was okay. Right. And this happens a lot throughout life. When it was me, it was okay. Yeah. When it was her, absolutely not. I was about to step in and have a problem with that. And when she saw that I wasn't going to allow that anymore, she had this recognition that it was more work to control me than it was worthwhile to have me and her family. And as a result,
so let's back up. Yeah, because we were talking earlier about what got you into foster care.
Yes.
And, to put it lightly, it was atrocious. The way that you were being raised was abusive, big T trauma,
of course,
the whole 9 yards. Like it would be clear to anyone, and it was clear to people because they're the people that pulled the trigger for you to end up in the system.
Right.
However, in the longest stay that you had in foster care,
yes,
you ended up being in a foster care setting that was also incredibly traumatic, very abusive. There was a tremendous amount of narcissistic abuse, which, as you guys know, I talk about a lot. And I really call narcissistic abuse, psychological terror,
of course,
because it's really what it is. They are trying to terrorize you into submission,
of course,
and make you believe that you are of no value without them.
Of course. Yep. You have no value. You deserve this. Absolutely. She would create all of these little stories around me constantly where people hated me, where they had come to her and told her how bad I was, but they were tolerating me because of her. It was this whole thing. And because I was a child, it didn't occur to me that she would be lying to me about it. She was well known in the community. People she would get awards for being like, this great foster mother and all of this stuff. And like people just didn't even know what she was doing at home. And the people who did know were too afraid to do anything about it. And I
mean, it's important to understand two things. Number one, how long were you in that foster care setting?
Probably over 10 years. So,
right. Wasn't she on either the committee or the board for the local foster care?
Yeah.
So can you just
like treasurer? Yeah. She was a treasurer on the foster care committee. Yeah, absolutely.
So she created this optic of foster care mom of the year.
Of course.
But what people did not understand is that she was ruling with an iron fist at home. And it wasn't just the foster care children.
Right.
Even with her biological children, this was not about discrimination against the foster care kids. It wasn't
anyone. So it was against the girls in her family, right? It was against one particular girl at a time. So when I wasn't there yet, it was her eldest daughter. When her eldest daughter moved out, she had to get foster children that included a boy and a girl, very important to her, which was myself and my brother. And she took all of her self-hatred and all of the pain that she had about who she was as a person, and she hurt me with it. And then when I wasn't there anymore, what happened? She moved it on to the next daughter in line, because it has nothing to do with any of us and everything to do with her. So
how would you define narcissistic abuse from your seat?
So lots of different kinds of narcissistic abuse. I would say that there are like archetypes of narcissism. This woman would have been the type of narcissist that perhaps a politician might be. I would say this is the type of person who has a grandiose version of themselves in their mind, will go out of their way to create this, persona out in the community, out in the world. She is the type of person who needs everything to look perfect, while everything at home can be absolutely the opposite of that. She's the type of person that abuses in private, praises in public, that sort of thing, where you are not noticing that this is even abuse, right? Because it doesn't look the way people need it to look. So who she was out in the world was an entirely different person than who she was at home. And like I said, a lot of people knew who she was at home, and she had all manner of excuses for why it was okay for her to treat me like I was a wild animal. And she would just be like, oh, well, her social worker said that this was how we needed to treat her. So she wouldn't offer me the same food. I wasn't able to use the same towels as the rest of the family. I was literally just this thing that she poured all of her abuse into. And so many of the people that were part of that family accepted that on my behalf, and sort of, so they were happy that the blight hadn't fallen on them, but also they had to sort of partially believe that that's what I deserved, right? So she's an incredible operator when you really get to think about it. This is somebody who didn't, go on to college or anything. She graduated high school when she was 18, and that was it for her. She never did anything else with her life. And yet, you know what I mean? So narcissism is one of those things that is both incredibly complex and incredibly specific, but also doesn't take a genius, which I guess is why there are so many narcissists in the world today and so many people who are suffering under that abuse. So,
and as someone who's kind of become an expert on it because you've lived it, I always make it really clear to people that the people who are narcissistic and are employing this type of control and power over other people actually have an incredibly poor sense of self-worth and an incredible lack of self-esteem. This does not come from a place of, I think I know better.
That's exactly
this comes from a complete place of, I feel like shit about myself, so I need to make myself feel better by making you feel worse.
Right. I need to make myself feel better by telling you that you are all the things that I hate about myself, right? So she would constantly say to me, you're a thief, you're a liar. And yes, as a child, definitely lied about things, but I wasn't stealing things. So that was actually really interesting to me, because the older I got, the more I realized that narcissists will just accuse you of whatever they're doing, right? So once you start to see that as the sort of blueprint in dealing with narcissists, I noticed that she would have these intense relationships with people that, could provide her with sort of that jolt she needed. Like, she had a cousin who had her only son die, and it was horrible and terrifying and just absolutely terribly sad for the entire community. And there she was, front and center, supporting that mom every single day. And I thought to myself, this woman is a monster. How does she have the capacity for this? She'd never been close to the woman before, and she actually was never close after, once the mother realized what was truly going on, once she realized she was doing it for attention. And she has these relationships throughout her life where people just kind of come in and they're there for like very intensely, and then they sort of fade out because people notice narcissists if they aren't dealing with trauma.
Well, and I think the reality is, I always describe that the capability of a narcissist is incredibly transactional. When a narcissist has a relationship with anybody, anybody, it is a quid pro quo. What am I going to gain from this? It is a means to an end, and it's a debit.
Of course.
I've done this for you, and so therefore you credit to me.
Absolutely.
And they don't really have, it's definitely a piece of narcissism in general. They're missing that empathy chip. They do not have the ability to empathize with people, and they'll make it look like they can. They're incredibly skilled.
Very adept. Absolutely.
But it is not embodied.
No, it is not. If you dig even just a tiny bit below the surface, you'll see that they're just very much in it for themselves, and very much in it so that they can be a point of contact for sharing all of that information and gossiping, because gossip is very important to a narcissist.
Can we I want you to be able to share from the book. I don't remember the name of the chapter, but the story where I think she was maybe trying to get back to Karen. I'm not quite sure what it was, but she took you on the shopping spree. And she wanted to buy you all these clothes, so you looked really specific in a specific way. And then is this the same chapter where she was trying to get you to nail down the story of exactly what she did for you?
Of course.
Okay, so can you tell this story? Because you'll tell it much better than I do.
Sure. So in the story, I don't use anybody's real names, and I call my foster mother Karen because that amuses me to do so. So you got to make yourself laugh. So anyway, the point of that story was effectively that, how do we think about this? So she was in another fight with her eldest daughter, who's about 16, 17 years older than I am at the time. So I am approximately 16 years old when the story's happening. So they're in another fight. They have these huge blowouts every 10 years or so, right? Where they're just completely have fallen out. And what Karen has done is taken me to the store and bought me a bunch of clothes that she thinks are expensive and look good on me and stuff. And she wants to do a whole fashion montage, right? So she wants to take pictures and she wants to share them with her daughter. She wants that to somehow get back to her daughter, Marie, that she is this great mother who is so wonderful and supports her foster daughter and loves her foster daughter the way perhaps Marie herself has always wished to be loved, right? So when and then she returned all the clothes after we took pictures, right? Except for this one very gross dress that I hated. So very gross, skin tight dress that one would not need to wear as a 16-year-old girl. However, we were having a discussion about it, and she was basically telling me the story the way she wanted me to tell the story so that it would get back to Marie. I was to go over and tell all of the girls that were in my winter guard, where Marie's daughter also did sports with me, so she was there as well. She wanted me to tell the story loudly enough that Marie's daughter, Jessica, would hear the story and report it back to Marie. So over and over and over again, she would make me retell the story and re-practice the story. And I had to say it exactly the way she wanted it, or else we were going to keep doing it. And I have ADHD. So that's not a super easy thing for me to be able to do, right? That's going to be something that's probably very irritating for my brain. So I wasn't participating in that the way she wanted. And I had an attitude about it because I was exhausted. I was on my way to Winter Guard, as I say in the book, and I was already late. And lateness for us is so anxiety inducing anyway. So she pulls up at the gym where we are practicing for that day. I get out of the car and I'm about to storm off, and she's in a minivan, and she sees that I'm about to storm off and shut the door, and she lurches the car forward and she parks it on my foot. When she realizes that she has hit my foot and that the car is, I've been trapped by the car stuck on my foot, she throws the car in park and she kind of laughs to herself and she says, well, I guess you won't be storming off today, huh? And I am screaming and crying in agony. And she says to me, now tell me the story the way I want it told. And in that moment, I had to put myself out of my pain and tell her the story the right way, right? Or how she called it, the right way. So I did so. She laughed maniacally to herself and just drove off. And in that moment, I'm sitting there crying, and I realize that this is the reality of her love, you know, for anyone. This is how she thinks love works. This is what she wanted her own daughter to feel. And I realized in that moment that I was participating. I was an accomplice to her abusing other people. And once you know that, you can't unknow it. So
what did that mean for you going forward? How did that shift things going forward for you?
So I couldn't, in good conscience, participate in her little games with her because I realized the harm that I was helping her do. I realized that through my connection to the community and my participation in these sports, I was allowing her more access to people she could hurt.
So what did you do differently?
So that's where sort of I start pushing back, where I sort of start having a little bit more of an attitude, where I sort of, she did this thing, and this is going to bring out the petty side of me. So I'm sorry in advance. I'm a work in progress. So basically she did this thing where she really liked sounding smart and she really liked tricking people, but she wasn't actually smart. And I was actually smart because, as I've said, I've read thousands of books, which is not a big thing. And I'm not saying being smart is great. Wisdom is what you're aspiring for, right? However, she liked to use all these big words and she would use them wrong. So I would then be like, no, what you actually meant was this word. Did you mean this word? And she would get so pissed. And of course, that would delight me. So dunking on this woman just became like my teenage self's highest goal. So I really it started to be a way that I could hurt her back, right? And she wasn't able to sort of do as much as she wanted to do because I was standing in her way whenever I could.
I love it. A little bit of empowerment, voice and choice right there, right?
Well, you know, as I said, I'm a work in progress. So I probably
we all are.
Other ways to do that. But, you know, hurting her back kind of, you know, she needed a little bit of salt.
So fast forward, you leave the situation when you're 18 years old, correct?
Right. So 20. You age out of foster care in Massachusetts a little later, but 20.
Okay. And tell me about where you're going from there, because it's important for people to understand this. And I said this to Dee off camera earlier, that my understanding of ACEs and the studying that I've done on trauma, I know for sure that where Dee sits today is where about 0.5% of the kids that go through foster care would sit, maybe even less. Right? Meaning you're a little bit of an enigma, right? People who have been experiencing, and your trauma really started from the get, you know, from infancy, perhaps even gestation, right? So people who have experienced the prolonged, chronic, complex level of distress and trauma that you experienced for the first 20 years of your life typically die very young, end up in incarceration, end up with a lot of addictions, end up with a ton of mental health diagnoses. So the fact that you are sitting where you're sitting, a 2-time published author, somebody who owns her own business, who's raising a healthy family, it is incredibly unusual. And I asked you off camera, why you thought that was. And your answer was very interesting to me. You were like, I grew up in a really affluent spot, a really white affluent spot.
Right.
And I could see other.
Right. That's right.
And I think, is it fair to say that you knew that there was more available to you than what you had experienced?
Yes, that is fair to say. Yeah, I definitely saw the people around me living a very different life. And thus, what I thought I might be able to aspire to was very different. What I was exposed to was very different. The books I was able to read, I wasn't going to an empty library every day. I was going to a completely stocked library where I'd made a strong relationship with the librarian. You know, like it just, my life completely changed because of reading, because of exposure, because of, I mean, and we see that all the time in my book, because you can see how many adults casually felt like they were already doing all they could for me by me being allowed to be where they were. So, I mean, you know, maybe
and
you're
I think it's
and
important
right.
to say one of your coping strategies was your lifeline, which was reading. And really, you know, plain and simple, it was really escapism, but in a very adaptive way.
Absolutely. Yes. So I was reading books, I was reading some people's trauma stories adjacent to mine, seeing how they survived. I was reading escapist books. I was reading constantly. I'd read, like, people used to get annoyed. They'd take me to the library after I had hounded them. And, you know, I would pick up all the books I could carry, especially things like giant Stephen King novels. I'd take them home and I'd be done with them like in a series of days. And they'd be frustrated because they just took me, you know what I mean? And now it was important to me to hear from other people that this isn't the way that your life is supposed to be. And that maybe it's just this woman or these people or these adults, and figure out why these adults feel this way about you. Figure out why they feel like you are worthy of this type of treatment in spaces that they control. And I mean, like, that's sort of what turned on my brain in terms of seeing the boundaries that people say aren't there, right? So, and sort of taking people's behavior as what they mean, as opposed to what they say. You know what I mean? So
100%. And I think, you know, what's so striking to me is that so many children would just, and I think it is probably some of the reading that you did, like they just wouldn't know enough to know it wasn't them. Right. And I think what you're saying to me is you knew inherently and innately it didn't start with you.
Right. Well, when I was young, I had a grandmother who was trying to take care of me and loved me very much. And she was constantly, when I was with her, telling me how much she loved me. She would take me to Ann and Hope back in the day. I don't know if y'all know what Ann and Hope was, but back 40 years ago, it was like a Kmart but above a Walmart, right? Like above a Walmart. So she would be taking me to buy me new underwear, new socks, and new like clothing, because I would constantly look as if I would look like a waif, effectively. And she wouldn't want that for her granddaughter. So she would be out there, you know, supporting me and those things. And it sort of gave me a little bit of dignity that I wouldn't have known for myself otherwise. And sort of that, since that was my starting point, it gave me an opportunity to see different types of adults in my life, right? Adults that had different types of relationships with me. So because of her, it wasn't all abuse all the time. It was her and then abusers. So I was able to sort of hold that gem in my heart.
Was that your dad's mom, your biological dad's mom?
Biological dad. It's actually, I say my grandmother, she was my great grandmother, but like, yes, it was my biological dad's grandmother. And she hated him because of drugs. He used drugs, and she just thought, she's like, how dare you have this daughter and not take care of her? So, yes.
So, you know, this really is a sidebar conversation, but I think it's really important to have, because people who are not schooled on the system, it could be a really good piece of information. Sure. Here you have a family member,
yes,
in the mix.
Right.
Why were you placed in foster care into homes of people that were not kin or family members?
So the reason I couldn't live with her specifically was because she was living in an elder folks retirement community, and you cannot you can't have children there or overnight guests for an extended period of time. However, I found out later in my life the money and services that went to foster families on my behalf that could have easily been given to my great-grandmother, that could have easily been given to any of my father's 10 living siblings in the United States. But that didn't happen. I can't say why. I can't say why they didn't do any research to find me someone that would have raised me in my own culture and community. I can't say. I assume it's because they don't have the resources to be investigating family members that aren't already approved for foster care. So they effectively put me wherever they could until I aged out.
So you age out, you're very innately and intuitively aware that there's more available for you than what you've experienced up to this point.
Right. That's right.
How did that change the next half of your life?
So at first, when she threw me out, I went through a very dark depression because I had spent all of this time and energy, earning her love, which is effectively what narcissists will do, right? They'll tell you that you can earn it if you are worthy enough, and then they will love you the way you deserve, and they will love you the right way, right? So I spent all this time and energy and effort into being part of their family. I went to court when I was 18 years old and got my name officially changed. I did all of these things to prove to her that I was worthy of being her daughter and stay in that family forever. Even though they were abusing me, I stayed quiet about it, all of those things. And then she just decided I didn't belong anymore and just ripped me out of her life. And there were a lot of other people around her and a lot of other family members that should have asked, where's Di? Where did she go? Where's she, and nobody ever did. And not
so
only
let's
just
that, back up, because I think this is an important part, and it was something that was not lost on me in the book. You just mentioned earlier that there is a monetary exchange.
Yes.
For foster families.
That's right.
And there was a moment in the book where you talked about the fact that she made the conscious decision not to adopt you and your brother.
Right.
Because then she would lose the monetary compensation that she was garnering as a foster parent.
Correct.
Though you were still willing to participate enough in this family to actually change your last name, even though excuse me, you were not legally adopted.
That's right. Yeah. So she had a whole
You think
story
part of the reason why once you aged out of foster care at 20 years old is why she was like, because remember, all relationships are transactional. Everything has a means to an end, that you could not now provide for her which she needed and wanted by way of the financial resource, that she had no more use for you. So,
yes, of course, right? So, firstly, I would say that she no longer, so firstly, I was put under guardianship, which meant that DCFS wasn't checking on us anymore, but also she was still getting paid by the state. The reason I know I have ADHD is because if you have children that are dealing with more disorders, more things, more trauma, you pay, the foster care systems pay them more, right? So she had basically maxed out on my trauma, on my testing and all of those things to make sure she was getting the highest amount of money for me, the highest amount of money for my brother. And then, of course, I didn't realize she was still getting paid for me. She made me work from the time I was 14 and give her the money because she said she was losing money on having me in her home. And she would always just be like, well, I should just throw you out. I should just throw you out and put you back out on the street, right? And of course, I'd be terrified because I knew what existed out there at the time. So I would work harder and try harder, and I would do tons of hours while I was trying to finish high school. And she was constantly trying to get me to drop out of high school, trying to get me to do, I needed to be doing less so that I could be making more money for the family. And I'm accepting all of these things as reality. When I found out, when I was thrown out of her home, I reached out to the Department of Social Services for a different reason, which I will tell you in a second. And I found out that she was getting paid for me all the way up into the month before that she threw me out, right? Up to the month before, because that was my birthday month. That's the year I aged out. That was the month I aged out. Similarly, my brother, my half brother, is 18 months younger than I am. Now, 18 months later, my brother experiences the same suspicious timing where he's done something that he needs to be thrown out for. And he is even more homeless than I was. And what I mean by that was I was able to couch surf. So I was experiencing sort of a different kind of homelessness than him, who effectively lived behind a shopping center in the foster father's. He was a landscaper. And so my younger brother went and lived in the shopping center in one of the trucks that my foster father had left there, and he would just be sleeping there. And I didn't find out because I had already moved out. So that's how that happened. So do I think that it was because she stopped getting paid for me? Of course I do. Of course I do. But let me just tell you quickly the reason that I found out that she was getting paid for me. So when I was thrown out of my house, I was shocked that nobody ever came looking for me. A series of months, I moved to Atlanta. I had some friends living down there. I was very, very lucky. Much cheaper to live in Atlanta than it is to live in Boston. I took all of my worldly goods, which were effectively fit into a laundry basket, with me and moved across the country the way you only can when you're in your early 20s. Now, a couple of months later, Karen's eldest daughter calls me on the phone, and I've been leaving her messages. I've been leaving her messages to be like, oh my God, what happened? I didn't mean to do this. And it turns out she was like, Di, what are you doing? What's going on? And it turns out that Karen had told her that the reason I was no longer around anymore was because I had accused the foster father of rape of one of the other daughters, and that DCFS needed to physically examine the youngest daughter. And thus, that was so traumatizing that none of them could stand to have me around anymore because I was so damaged by foster care. That was the story that my foster mother was telling people as to why I was never to be spoken of again and why I just disappeared off the face of the planet.
Not the fact that she kicked you out.
Correct. She had basically taken somebody who had lived in her house for 15 years, who she told everybody that she adopted, and she just disposed of me with no social consequences. And this was the story she told to get away with it.
And this is why I wanted to really be clear with the audience, is that when I say the fact that you're sitting where you're sitting is a miracle, it truly is such a miracle, because the trauma of abandonment and discardment and betrayal and neglect, above and beyond all the other abuse, is so incredibly damaging to the human psyche. Mm-hmm. That it is such an honor to be able to sit across from you and be able to have this conversation, because most people who have experienced this cannot do so. Yeah. Yeah. And I say that in the book in the beginning, because I really wanted anybody else to sort of come out and say what needed to be said here. And I was waiting for years, holding this inside, lying awake at night, sort of scorekeeping, remembering obsessively. And I realized that no one was going to come, right? There was no hero coming. Nobody was going to step out first. And maybe I'd been born with the things that needed to exist in someone before this was possible. So I sat down and I started writing. And before I knew it, I had an entire book. So, I mean, hopefully, and you know what? I'll be honest with you. The thing that I'm seeing from people who are reading it is how much they resonate with it, and how much they've gone through similar things to me, and how much it had been as if I was living in the same house with them. Now, these are people that I knew. These were people that I trusted, that I had maybe grown up with or gone to school with, and I didn't know this was the life they were living either. But the fact that all of these people had experienced these traumas and then experienced the exact same, behaviors as a result was just absolutely stunning to me. So all of this time I had thought it was my story that I was holding in, but really it was everybody's story.
It was everybody's hurt. It was time for everybody to let it go. And that's been the most rewarding experience in having written this book, is how many people are able to put down their trauma as a result of reading it happen to someone else. So,
I mean, do you feel as though reading this book was one of the best therapies you could have given yourself?
At first, I thought I was just taking it out of my body, right? At first, I thought I was writing it down so I didn't have to obsessively remember it anymore. It could be somewhere else, right? But instead, yes, taking it out, writing it down. And this is why I recommend to everybody that they either journal or write their own story. I realized things that were happening that I wasn't noticing were happening at the same time from point of view, right? So I would write stuff down chronologically, but you remember it differently, right? So you remember in your mind an entire adult agency that didn't exist when you were a child. So when you start writing it as an adult, you're like, oh my God, wait, I was 14 when that happened. Oh no, wait, I couldn't have been to blame for this because I wasn't old enough to have been able to speak up for myself. And it changes everything. The amount you are misremembering, the amount of agency you had in situations that you are blaming yourself for that happened in your childhood.
It is an incredibly profound thing for you to have said. And, you know, so often when I'm working with people, I hear this guilt and this shame for, why didn't I, or how couldn't I have? And I always am saying to them, listen, what kind of agency did you actually have? What kind of resourcing did you actually have? Are you thinking about that from the lens of the 50-year-old? Right. Or are you thinking about that through the lens of the 8-year-old? Right. Because how much does an 8-year-old really have control over that environment?
Exactly.
And it's a process for them to flip that mind a little bit and bring it back to the 8-year-old. And that's where, for me in particular, as a practitioner, if somebody uses a therapeutic model under hypnosis, allows the older self to be able to sit beside the younger self. Yeah. And be able to sit there from the observer role and say, wow, like you actually really did the absolute best you could have given your resourcing at the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the case. And I was very lucky because I was, as I say, able to look at my daughter, able to look at my children who also have ADHD. And I'm sitting there looking at my kids and I'm like, oh shit, I was totally wrong about that. Like, oh God, I didn't do that. Like, why am I assigning blame to myself when I wouldn't assign blame to my children for the do you know what I mean? So that sort of flips over, and that's where you start healing. When you stop reharming yourself with the blame that the abusers tried to put off onto you. Once you stop agreeing with them that this is the narrative, that this is the story, that this was how it happened, suddenly you take that back for your inner tiny kid and you're like, oh, and then the next thing you know, your life changes. Your life starts going in a different direction when you sort of give that love and attention that you should have gotten to yourself. The next thing you know is it changes where you'll go. So, I mean, it's been the entire experience has been stunning from beginning to end.
Absolutely. So the question that I want to end with is this. You found yourself growing up in a multitude of parenting situations that, for lack of better term, were incredibly toxic and harmful to the children under their care. Yeah. How do you know how to be a mom and how to parent?
So that is a great question. The chapter in the book that I sort of chat with it about is, and sort of think on it about, is called The First Mother. And I'm talking about myself. The first mother I've ever known is me. So I've kind of gone through a reparenting experience with myself. I have reparented myself as mother and father. and sort of given myself the grace that I was never given to sort of really look at the things I was dealing with and the behaviors I was exhibiting as a result of trauma. Tons of journaling went into that process, obviously. So when I was able to reparent myself, I realized that I didn't just want my children to fit into a box, right? I didn't just want my children to be good workers. I didn't just want my children to be good at obeying me, right? I wanted my children to be the best people that they were. I wanted them to be them. And I realized that the way that the parenting that I had seen wasn't conducive to that. So I very much had to change the way I thought about it in order to be better at it. And it's very much a give. It's very push and pull in my relationship with my children because they are constantly teaching me new things. But I will tell you something that is very important when you are dealing with trauma, even if you are the type of person that isn't interested in passing your abuse on. And it is this. When I am parenting my children, I realized that certain things that still scared me, that still maybe I hadn't dealt with yet, were things that I was avoiding, right? And my avoiding those things, my behavior in avoiding them, passed that fear onto my children without my intending to do so. So I don't swim in the ocean because I am irrationally afraid of sharks. I realize it's irrational. There's nothing I can do about it. Now, if I don't swim in the ocean because I'm afraid, what have I taught my children who live on the ocean with me? I have taught them to fear the ocean without explaining why. So I am avoiding it and I am passing that avoidance down, whether I have intended to or not. So deal with your stuff before parenting, during parenting, but know that if you aren't dealing with it, you are passing it down. So super duper important to be like as self-aware as you can if you want to parent in a free way. If you want to be free of these traumas, you have to be super self-aware and be journaling like crazy.
I love it. What a perfect way to end. So I know you're an avid, voracious reader.
Yes.
I love to give free, low, no cost resourcing to my audience at the end of episodes.
Sure.
I know for me, this has been an amazing book. It gave me much deeper insight into someone's personal experience. Mm-hmm. When I started my own healing journey, the first book I read was Brene Brown's Daring Greatly, and it caused me to see life through a lens that I could no longer unsee through.
Of course.
So what kind of free or low, no cost resource above and beyond your book, which is Indomitable, which you can get right off of your website, which is dciruolo.com, and all of that will be in the show notes. What other low and no cost resource would you recommend to somebody who's touched by your story?
So I would say that I, number one, have a Facebook group that I'm constantly sharing in. It's called Indomitable Insiders. That's something that I do for free. You can follow me on LinkedIn, where I'm constantly giving new sort of advice and thoughts about how we deal with sort of trauma in the workplace, because we see that exhibited a lot. Trauma doesn't just stay at the door because we wish it did. So I talk about that quite a bit. But what I would say is read what you vibe with. Like, you don't have to read the same things that Stacey and I have read. You can find the person that speaks to you the most and be using that to help you click your pieces into place. That'll help you click your puzzle pieces into place, right? It doesn't have to be me. It doesn't have to be. So a lot of times people say to me, Di, what do you want people to take out of your book? I don't want you to take anything. I want you to plant the seed in your life, and I want you to see what grows from it. I want you to look at it as if it's a lens for you to be able to look through the world at. So free or no cost, get into podcasts. Read as much as you can, whatever you vibe with. It's going to unlock things, whether it's specific to you or not. So, I mean, I recently finished reading Big Magic, which is Elizabeth Gilbert. And she tells this amazing story about how she wrote Eat, Pray, Love. And she was talking about how this woman came up to her and said, you gave me the bravery and the courage I needed to leave my abusive ex when you talked about how you put a restraining order on your ex. And Elizabeth Gilbert is like, I never did that. There was never any abuse, and I never put a restraining order on my ex. But she didn't tell the woman that, because that was the thing that she needed in order to have the courage to do what she needed to do. And that's what I'm telling you. You will find yourself in people's stories regardless.
That's amazing.
Do the effort, just do the thing, right? You're great. You can handle it. Go.
Amazing. You're so inspirational. I want to remind people how they can find you. So number one, the book is Indomitable. It's amazing. It's Indomitable, a foster care story by Dee Ciruolo. Mm-hmm. Her website is her name, dciruolo.com. You can find her on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, all at her name. Red Now, Dee Ciruolo. And she has a Facebook group called Indomitable Insiders.
I sure do.
Thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you for having me, Stacey. It's always so fun to talk to you. You are so filled with knowledge on the subject matter. So your listeners are getting tons from you. I'm so glad I got a chance to speak with you.
Thank you so much. So guys, if you liked this podcast episode, please subscribe so you can be notified when the next cast is going to be released. You can do so at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, and go get this book.
Mm-hmm.
It will change your life. It'll give you a different perspective. It'll give you a different lens through which to see your own life. And you're not going to be disappointed with the time you spent reading it. It's going to be impactful. So thank you so much. We really appreciated having you today.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time, y'all. I appreciate you.